Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Jafar J, an expert on environmental and agricultural sciences. And today I'm going to talk to you about the causes of the heavy metal pollution. Primarily, let's look at what are the heavy metals. Heavy metals are generally defined as metals with relatively high densities, atomic weights, or atomic numbers. The criteria used and whether the metalloids are included, what is depending on the other and the context. From the scientific perspective, there is no generalized explanation of the heavy metal concept. In metallurgy, for example, a heavy metal might be defined on the basis of the density, whereas in physics, the distinguished criterion might be an atomic number, while a chemist would like be more concerned with chemical behavior. More specific definitions have been published, but none of these have been widely used. Um, in order to understand the better the topic, let's look at what is the heavy metals pollution in a broader senses. In broader sense, the heavy metals, it is an environmental pollution with a high relative atomic mass, such as lead and mercury. These metals derive from the number of the sources, um, including the lead in petrol or industrial effluents and the leaching of metal ions and from the soil into the lakes, into the rivers by acid rain. They are easily incorporated into the biological molecules and exert their toxic effects by displacing the essential metals of a lower binding the power in the biological active molecules, or by acting as non-competitive inhibitors of enzymes. And heavy metal, indeed, the heavy metal pollution is a strict problem, and it should be taken by the steps by any governments to eliminate its effects. Heavy metal pollution is one of the most serious environmental problems that is spreading all over the world. In recent years, due to the development of the industrial centers, such as the metal smelting, mining activities, battery production, tanning, oil refining, paint production, pesticides, printing and photography industries, and influx of the factory waste into the environment, the release of these elements into the air, water, and the soil that have become much more than the normal, and have created the dangerous conditions for the environment around the world. Because the materials resulting from these activities are non-degradable and not only affect the physical and the chemical properties of the soil, but also pose a serious risk to the human health by entering the food chain. Therefore, the concentration of heavy metals in agricultural soil is very important. Um, Now we can move on to local and local heavy metal pollution. Heavy metal pollution is complex phenomenon, and it can be triggered by a variety of the things and activities at micro and macro levels, including the mining, industrial production such as foundries, smelters, oil refiners, petrochemical plants, pesticide production, chemical industry, untreated sewage sludge, and diffuse sources such as the metal piping, traffic, and combustion by products from the local burning power stations. Moreover, according to the origin and scope of heavy metal pollution levels, we can classify them at local and global levels. Local specific pollution, it implies specific causes that occur in a small areas and are easy to find. This type of heavy metal pollution is seen in industrial cities, older factories, the roads, and sewage treatment plants. Also, agricultural lands where the chemical fertilizers are used are one of the major sources of pollution. Global widespread pollution covers a large area and has various causes, the causes of which are difficult to determine. Cases like this include the spread of contaminations, the contaminants, across air, ground, and water systems, which has major consequences for human health and environment. Reducing the emissions of heavy metals in therefore focus of international and EU action. Let's look at what are the types of the heavy metals. These include the environmental heavy metals, nutritionally essential heavy metals, and other heavy metals. In order to understand better, let's explain each of them individually. First, let's talk about environmental heavy metals. Chromium, arsenic, cadmium, mercury, and oxidized lead are the most common heavy metals which can pollute the environment. They have the greatest potential to cause the harm on account of their extensive use, the toxicity of some of their combined or elemental forms, and their widespread distribution in the environment. Mercury, oxidized lead, and cadmium are of the greatest concern because of their ability to travel long distance in the atmosphere. Heavy metals can become strongly toxic by mixing with different environmental elements such as the water, soil, air, and the humans and other living organisms can be exposed to them through the food chain. What are the nutritionally essential heavy metals? Some heavy metals are nutritionally essential elements playing the key roles in different physiological and biological processes like iron, cobalt, zinc, copper, chromium, molybdenum, and selenium, manganese. And let's see the amount of heavy metals in the average, the 70 kilograms human body. The human body requires a small amount of heavy metals like zinc, copper, and iron, and aluminium, nickels, and etc. Now let's talk a little bit about the toxicity. And heavy metal toxicity poisoning is a result of exposure to heavy metals like lead, mercury, and arsenic. Heavy metals belong more serious toxic effects, including cancer, brain damage, and death, rather than the harm they can cause to one or more of the skin, lungs, stomach, kidneys, liver, or heart. Heavy metals are often assumed to be highly toxic or damaging to the environment. Some are, while certain others are toxic only if they're taken in excess or encountered in the certain forms. Inhalation of certain metals, either as fine dust or most commonly as the fumes, can also result in a condition called metal fume fever. Now let's move on to the other heavy metals. A few other non-essential heavy metals have one or more toxic forms. Kidney failure and fatalities have been recorded arising from the ingestion of germanium dietary supplements. Exposure to osmium tetroxide may cause the permanent eye damage and can lead to respiratory failure and death. And indium salts are toxic if more than a few milligrams are ingested and will affect the kidneys, liver, and heart. Cisplatin, which is an important drug used to kill the cancer cells, is also a kidney and nerve poison. Bismuth compounds can cause the liver damage if taken in the excess. Insoluble uranium compounds, as well as a dangerous radiation they emit, can cause permanent kidney damage. And being persistent pollutants, heavy metals accumulate in the environment and consequently contaminate the food systems. Accumulation of potentially toxic heavy metals in biota cause potential health threat to their consumers, including human. Now let's move on to the categories that heavy metals have. There are typically consisting of weight or density based, biological and chemical, electronics, magnets and lightning, strength or durability based, coloring and optics, nuclear. Heavy metals are commonly defined as those elements with a high relative density. These metals have the potential to cause the environmental or human toxicity. Heavy metals poisoning can be acute or chronic and may be caused by the following metals: arsenic, lead, mercury, cadmium, copper, chromium. In this slide, you can see the limit and the target values for the heavy metals. And from the limit and the target values perspective, it is classified as upper assessment, the result in percent of the target value, and lower assessment, therefore in percent of the target value. Let's get acquainted some interesting facts about the heavy metals contamination. With an increasing number of the mining, industrial production, foundry, smelting, oil refiners, petrochemical, pesticide production, and the various chemical industries, we can conclude the followings. The potential ecological risk in different countries is highest in Asia, followed by Europe, Australia, America, and Africa. An estimated 9 million people die each year from the toxic pollutants in air, water, and soil, according to the 16% of all the deaths worldwide. The increasing number of the babies born with the various genetic syndromes, increase in people with a cancer and other physiological diseases. As we already conclude, we can understand heavy metals accumulate in ecosystems and damage the human health. In line with the EU's commitments under the Air Convention, specific legislation led to reductions in emissions of heavy metals across the Europe. Comparison to the past years, recently the lead emissions, mercury emissions, and the cadmium emissions have continued to decline across the EU 27 member states. Metals such as lead, cadmium, and the mercury are toxic to biota. Also, ambient air concentrations are above limit values in only a few areas of Europe, typically associated with specific manufacturing sites. However, metal accumulation in the atmosphere exposes ecosystems and organisms and cause bioaccumulation in the food chain, which has a negative impact on the human health. Reducing the emissions of heavy metals in therefore a focus of international and EU action. As you can see from the slide, between the 2005 and 2020, most member states reduced their emissions of cadmium, Hg and Pb, with the reductions of 10% or more being achieved by the 18, 23 and 24 member states respectively. Emission increases were also seen during this period. However, in some cases, these increases do not necessarily cause the concern, as they reflect the relatively small increases in absolute emissions from the low baseline levels. From the experience of the 2020, we can see the four members states, including the Hungary's emissions of cadmium, have increased. And that's for today's lesson. Here are some resources I used for the information, and thank you very much for listening.